already knows all about you. Wendy Davis is I'm going to cry, is a personal hero of mine.
Yay!
She's a former state senator in Texas who did the rather epic filibuster protecting women's reproductive rights.
Totally outrageous.
And just amazing. We were watching that on C-SPAN as much as they would show it, just holding you up with our love and attention and everything else. And we're so pleased to have her here to inspire us. We've got 2 weekends and then a week of a lot of work. And everybody needs to get serious. We all need to be turning out for Get Out the Vote. We need to grab a friend or two and bring them to bring out the vote. Very, very important, because we know we can do this. We have the numbers. We just have to make the calls and do that. So I'm just so thrilled to have you. Welcome to Fairfield.
So
I'm introducing you instead of Susie Drish, who is our chair, who has got a little bug and is at home.
Okay.
Thank you so much, and work your magic here.
Oh.
We won't make you stand for 11 hours. We won't make you stand
Well,
that long.
I'm so excited to be here with all of you, especially because we're so close to the election now. I was here during the caucuses, and things felt obviously incredibly important then, but now we are literally down to the wire. And as you know, your state has an outsized influence on what the outcome of this election is going to be. And so I know you all individually own that responsibility and are working as hard as you can. I'm so grateful that we have people like Christopher, who is here working as hard as he's been working, and Sue was telling me a lot about him as we were driving up. And then of course Jessie, who's your regional for this area and beyond, who has been giving her 1,000% to make sure that we deliver this election successfully for Hillary. And I know a lot of you have been making phone calls and knocking on doors on Hillary's behalf. And as part of that, I hope that you share your personal reasons for why you support her, because I think it makes much more of an impact with people than the script that, you know, no offense to your regional and your field organizer here, but the script sometimes can fall a bit flat. When we share our stories with each other, I do think it's a powerful influencer in how and why this election is so important and why their vote is so desperately needed for Hillary, particularly anyone at this late date who may still be on the fence. And for me, those reasons really are wrapped up in my experiences as a young woman in this country and the privileges that were made available to me in a really hard time in my life, because there were once people who believed in investing in young people like me. I went to the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act passage at the LBJ Library a few years ago, and President Clinton spoke there, and he said something that has made such an impact on me. I think about it all the time. He talked about the fact that for the first time, literally in the history of this country, we have Americans all over the country who do not have the promise of what this country once promised us. It used to be the case that if you were willing to work hard, you could create a better tomorrow than your yesterday. And yet, today in this country, there are people working harder than they ever have before. And yet, the promise of a better tomorrow is completely out of their reach. And that's not some stroke of fate or accidental. It's very closely tied to the fact that we no longer have policies in place that are making it possible for your hard work to result in a better tomorrow than your yesterday. Hello, come on in. Hi. Hi.
Hey, one of our heroes.
Thank you. So when I was a young woman, my parents got divorced when I was really young, and my mother only had a 9th grade education. She was part of a farm family, 14 kids. And when she became the sole financial support to me and my 3 siblings, she did it in a very low-wage, fast food restaurant working job, which was all she could really find. And so we lived at the poverty line for the remainder of my childhood. When I was 18 years old, I was filled with the plan and hope that I was going to become the first person in my family to graduate from college. And when I was 18, I discovered that I was expecting a baby. who, by the way, is 34 years old today, and she is the grandmother of my 5-month-old granddaughter. So the story ends very, very well. But it ends well because I had ultimately the capacity to move myself up and out of poverty. When I was in my 20s, I enrolled in some classes at a community college near my home. I was working full-time and a part-time job, but I could fit that in at night. And I could afford it because I had Pell Grants available to me and other financial aid. And the great thing about community college, I was just in Colorado and we were laughing that marijuana is considered a gateway drug. It's legal in Colorado now. But community college is really a gateway into higher education in a way that is so profound. For me, it ultimately led me all the way to graduating from Harvard Law School. And so that was made possible for me because my government invested in programs that supported that kind of financial aid. As you know today, that is not the case. Not only do we have far less in the way of financial aid available to students across this country, but we are requiring them to take out greater and greater amounts of loans to pay their tuitions that are on the rise all over the country as state governments pull their support for tuition. And we have a person running in this campaign who's made that a pivotal part of what she wants to do. To, number one, forgive student loan debt for so many students who are bearing the crushing burden of it right now. But number two, to make sure that we have those Pell Grants and other financial aid restored so that we can make college affordable again. I also had something that Hillary Clinton has been talking about throughout this campaign in a way that is unique. I don't think I've ever heard a presidential candidate elevate the issue of affordable quality child care in the way that Hillary Clinton has. It is non-existent in this country right now. And I know we talk a lot about the glass ceiling that women hit sometimes in our careers, but this, for so many women and their families, is a concrete ceiling. It is a barrier beyond which they cannot move. And the reason they cannot, when you think about the suppressed minimum wage in this country, which realizes about $15,000 a year for a working family, women who want to enter the workforce have to pay more in childcare costs than they'd be able to make in a low-wage job. That was my mother's experience way back in the day, that low-wage job. And so because I had affordable quality childcare, I had an opportunity to stay not only in the workplace, but also to be on that educational journey. I think about all the women today who want very much to be making an income, earning a good income for their families, who want the same kind of opportunities I had to climb an educational ladder, and yet, because there is no support for their children while they do that, it keeps them from accomplishing their best hopes and dreams. That doesn't just hurt that woman or her family, it hurts the entire country because it hits our economy. When we don't have women doing well and putting money into the economy, it hits every single one of us and hurts every single one of us. And so you've heard Hillary Clinton, I'm sure, say before, as I have, when women do better, we all do better. And there's a reason for that. It is not trite. It's absolutely true. And then finally, and the reason I put my pink sneakers on and stood on the Senate floor for all those hours, I had access to reproductive health care that made it possible for me to plan when and whether I would have another child. That health care was the only health care I knew. It was a Planned Parenthood clinic near my home. For 4 years, I was uninsured, like so many Americans today. And they provided me not just my well woman care, but incredible counseling and support and contraception so that I could make sure I didn't face a second unplanned pregnancy. If I had, at that point in time, I would have been completely derailed. I have no question in my mind about that. So when we think about this conversation that we have in this country today about reproductive freedoms, I know we get caught up sometimes in choice or anti-choice. But what really is important in that conversation is that by allowing women to control our reproductive autonomy, we have the ability to control our economic opportunity. They're inextricably linked and so important. And Hillary, of course, has always been a supporter of making sure that women have that access. When I finished my educational journey and I looked up and finally started paying attention to politics, it was Hillary Clinton really that caught my attention. She was First Lady. I was in my late 20s, turning 30 years old. She was fighting for universal health care. And I remember as watching her, not only was I struck by the fact that I felt she was fighting for people like me, but also I was struck by the fact that as a woman and as First Lady, she was receiving an unprecedented amount of pushback and vitriolic criticism for the fact that she had weighed into a policy conversation. When she engaged in that battle, what was most remarkable about her behavior was the fact that she put her head down, she worked through that headwind, continued to be committed to that cause, and when she lost, watching her as a role model to me, I got to observe what it looked like to lose with grace and dignity, but also with grit and determination. Because as you know, she kept fighting, and because of that fight, 8 million children in this country today are covered in the Children's Health Insurance Program, which was the byproduct of all of that work that she'd engaged in. If she did nothing else in her entire life, that would be enough. It has had a dramatic improvement on the lives of so many people in America. And then she, of course, went to that conference in Beijing as First Lady and spoke so forcefully on behalf of women's equality. And as a young woman in this country, hearing my First Lady stand and speak with such authority, such commitment, in a place that was hostile to women's freedoms in every regard, it really meant a lot to me. Then when she was, of course, a U.S. Senator, she worked on the Family Medical Leave Act, again, making me feel like she was working and fighting for people like me. Fighting, of course, for the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act, and I know you had Lilly Ledbetter here recently. And then as Secretary of State, establishing the first ever ambassadorship for women and girls, because she understood and still understands how important it is that we support women and girls to realize their full opportunity, not just in this country, but around the globe. I will never forget the hearing that she had before a congressional committee while she was Secretary of State, and she was being questioned rather rudely and rather hostilely by a congressman who had decided that he was going to best her in a tit for tat, a back and forth. And he was pressing on her about the administration's support for women's reproductive freedoms around the globe. And she answered with the most unapologetic, forceful, intelligent response and argument on behalf of women's reproductive freedoms that I had ever heard. And I'll have to tell you that that day when I conducted my filibuster in Texas, I was carrying Hillary Clinton with me because she had paved the way and been a role model for me to give me the kind of courage and the belief that I too could fight for something that I understood was so vitally important. If you watched that day, what you know is that I was not successful in getting the filibuster past the midnight deadline. I actually stood for almost 13 hours before the governor finally, the lieutenant governor, finally called the filibuster to an end, breaking about every rule in the book in order to do so. But what was extraordinary in that day and in that moment was that we came together in a way that we haven't in Texas in a very, very long time. We tend to believe that things are predetermined, that our voices are not going to make a difference, and so why bother? We give up before the fight even begins. But on that particular day, for whatever reason, without even planning to, when they woke up and were eating their morning breakfast, thousands of people made a pilgrimage to the Texas Capitol from all over our state and from states actually even beyond our state. And before long, the Capitol was filled to the point that it had to be closed for the first time in history because it was filled to capacity. And it is a huge Capitol. And they filled the galleries, they filled the hallways, they filled every level of the rotunda, and they spilled out all over the Capitol lawn for those that couldn't get into the building. And in that final 15 minutes, when the governor, lieutenant governor, called the filibuster to an end, my sister Senate colleague, Leticia Vandeputte, frustrated because her microphone had been turned off and she wasn't being recognized, she asked a perfect, poignant question for that moment, but it also had a really broad context to it too. And her question was, at what point is a woman's voice to be heard over those of her male colleagues in the room? And when she asked the question, the people in the gallery stood and began screaming with all their might, as did all the folks who were gathered in the hallways and on every level of the rotunda and outside the Capitol in the Capitol lawn. It was the most thunderous, beautiful experience of what it means to be a part of a democracy that I had ever had the privilege to observe. And it was because of their shouts that the Secretary of the Senate was unable to take that vote in time for the midnight deadline. So in that moment, we won. Now, it was briefly lived in terms of the battle over that particular bill. The governor called us back to another special session. The bill did pass into law, and we did see in my state the devastating consequences to women because of it. We also know that victory was ultimately ours because we had a Supreme Court, yet another reason why we need Hillary Clinton, that overturned that law just a few short weeks ago. But going back to that moment when we came together as a group, we all understood the power that we have as individuals in a place where we tend not to understand that we each possess that power. You all in your state, I think, tend to see that more clearly because the impact that you've had in presidential elections for a very long time is so profound. But we cannot forget for a moment or leave for a moment a single voice not speaking as part of this particular election. I know that in the course of the next couple of weeks, 28 days left in the election, you're going to talk to people who say, my vote won't make a difference, or I'm just going to sit this one out. But I would encourage you to invite them to understand how truly powerful each of us is. And that one by one by one by one, that we may not feel powerful alone. Just like those thousands of people in the Texas Capitol that day, though they may not have understood that they were going to be able to make any difference at all when they got in their car that day, when they showed up and they were joined one by one by one by one by every other person who decided to have enough faith and confidence in their voices to come, that's when they were able to make a difference. And that's what you're going to do in this state. In my state, we are much less likely to deliver an outcome favorably for Hillary Clinton in this election, though I will never say never. And I think we are going to get much closer than we have in a very, very long time. But given that we have the dynamic that we have there, we will be relying on you, quite honestly. We need you to speak for us in this election. And we will be watching and sending you all of our prayers and faith and hopes and appreciation that you can possibly imagine. And on election night, when CNN is moving states over to the blue side or the red side as the returns come in, when Iowa is delivered to the blue side, and I truly believe it will be because of you.
Yes.
I will remember every single time. So much appreciation for all of your hard work. Thank you very, very, very much.
It seems to me that our biggest potential for swinging Iowa to Hillary is to get the independents and Bernie supporters who are all hashtag not never Hillary. I'd love to know how to do that.
I can tell you what I say. I'd love to hear what others say as well. And I've been asked this question or met this challenge quite a lot with some of the younger audiences that I've talked to. And what I try to impress upon them, number one, is respect for their choice and their voice at the ballot box and however they will choose to use that. But number two, to ask that they consider, at the end of the day, this is a race in which either Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump is going to be elected as our president. And as a young person in particular, if we are looking at Supreme Court justice appointments, which will probably number 2 or 3 in this particular president's administration, we are talking about Supreme Court justices who are going to make decisions that will impact for decades the lives of the people who will live with a Donald Trump or a Hillary Clinton. And there's so much hanging in the balance on that, not just women's reproductive freedoms, voting rights, marriage equality, campaign finance reform, immigration reform. So many of these issues that a lot of the folks that were supporting Bernie Sanders, for example, believe very, very strongly in. Criminal justice reform. Everything is going to be dependent on what happens with those Supreme Court appointments. So I invite them to consider voting for a Supreme Court that they want to see, and understanding that no candidate will ever be perfect in any of our minds, but that electing a president who will be the decider of the judges that they want to see on that court hopefully will motivate them.